On a quiet summer night at San Francisco International Airport, 4 fully loaded passenger planes were lined up on a taxiway, waiting their turn to take off. Suddenly, the pilots of those aircraft noticed something alarming. A large aircraft was descending rapidly in their direction, seemingly preparing to land. What made the situation even more bizarre was that the approaching aircraft had already received clearance from Air Traffic Control (ATC) to land. At first, the pilots thought it might be a misperception and assumed the plane would adjust its path and align itself with the vacant runway. But to their growing horror, it became clear that the incoming aircraft was not aiming for the runway. It was heading straight toward the 4 stationary planes. This frightening incident unfolded on July 7, 2017, when Air Canada Flight 759, a routine passenger flight from Toronto Pearson International Airport to San Francisco, took off with 135 passengers and 5 crew members on board. The aircraft, an Airbus A320, was flown by 2 experienced Canadian pilots who had previously landed at San Francisco numerous times. The flight proceeded uneventfully until its final approach. That night, however, would become one of the most terrifying near misses in aviation history. San Francisco International Airport has 4 runways, but due to space and safety considerations, only 2 are typically operational at any given time. Which pair of runways is used depends largely on wind direction. Aircraft must take off and land against the wind. On this night, the wind was blowing from the west, so runways to 8L and to 8R, 28 left and 28 right, were in use. However, runway 28L was temporarily closed for maintenance, and its lights had been turned off, making it visually inaccessible to incoming aircraft. Air Canada Flight 759 was cleared to land on runway 28R, the only available landing strip at the time. Since the pilots were familiar with the airport, they expected to see 2 parallel sets of runway lights, one 428L and the other 428R, allowing them to visually align with the correct one. But this expectation became the first critical mistake. Due to the closure of 28L, there was no second set of lights. Instead, the pilots mistook the nearby taxiway, which was illuminated and running parallel to 28R, as the runway they were cleared for. In the darkness, they confused the lights of the taxiway with those of a runway, not realizing they were about to land on a path where 4 planes were parked, ready to depart. What made matters worse was that those 4 planes, 3 from United Airlines and 1 from Philippine Airlines, were not empty. They were fully loaded with passengers, with over 1,000 people on board, and their fuel tanks were also full in preparation for long-haul flights. The distance between the taxiway and the runway was only about 100 meters. From the air traffic control tower, it was difficult to visually determine the exact alignment of the Air Canada aircraft, especially at night. Now, one might wonder why this misidentification happened in the first place. After all, it is standard procedure for pilots to be informed of closed runways. Compounding the issue, the pilots had been cleared for a visual approach, meaning they had to manually identify and align the aircraft with the correct runway without relying solely on the aircraft's instruments. While a visual approach is common in good weather conditions, it also increases the risk of human error, especially at night or when fatigue is a factor. Most modern aircraft have a guidance system that helps confirm runway alignment, but the Airbus A320 on this flight required the pilots to manually input the runway number to activate the system. For reasons unknown, the pilots failed to do so. This was their third significant mistake. Fatigue may have played a crucial role in these errors. The incident occurred at 11:05 p.m. local time, and both pilots had reportedly been on duty for nearly 19 hours without significant rest. At the time, Canadian regulations regarding pilot fatigue were less stringent than those in the US, potentially contributing to diminished alertness and poor judgment. Meanwhile, the pilots of the 4 aircraft on the taxiway were observing the Air Canada flight approaching not the runway, but directly toward them. Initially, no one raised an alarm, as it is common for planes approaching runway 28 to align slightly from the right to avoid flying directly over populated residential areas of San Francisco. But as the Air Canada jet got closer without correcting its course, suspicion turned into panic. The pilot of the Philippine Airlines aircraft, sensing imminent danger, switched on the aircraft's landing lights to alert the approaching jet that there were planes occupying the taxiway. Around the same time, the Air Canada pilots noticed unusual lights on what they believed to be their designated runway. Feeling that something wasn't right, they contacted the control tower and reported that they were seeing lights on the runway, possibly indicating other planes. The tower replied that runway 28R was clear, and that they were cleared to land, unaware that the aircraft was in fact lined up with the taxiway, not the runway. Typically, a second controller would have been on duty to monitor ground traffic, but given the late hour and lower traffic volume, only one controller was managing all operations at the time. That lone controller also didn't realize the aircraft was misaligned, a critical oversight that could have cost hundreds of lives. Luckily, the pilots of the planes waiting on the taxiway could hear the conversation between Air Canada 759 and the control tower. It became clear to them that the incoming aircraft was mistaking the taxiway for the runway. The pilot of the United Airlines plane at the front of the line, without even identifying himself, quickly radioed the tower with an urgent warning. Realizing the danger, the air traffic controller immediately issued a go-around order to Air Canada 7. By then, the aircraft was just a few feet above the third plane in line, with only a split second to spare. The pilots of Flight 759 pulled up and aborted the landing, narrowly avoiding what could have become the deadliest accident in aviation history. If they had delayed even a second longer, the aircraft would have plowed into the line of planes, igniting a massive fire fueled by thousands of gallons of aviation fuel. Following the incident, a full investigation was launched by the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB. The findings confirmed multiple pilot errors, failure to read the NOTAMs, failure to activate the instrument landing system, and poor decision-making, likely influenced by fatigue. As a result, new rules were implemented at San Francisco International Airport, including a ban on visual approaches when a parallel runway is closed, and a requirement that ground traffic controllers be present even during off-peak hours. This terrifying near disaster served as a wake-up call for the aviation industry. It underscored the importance of attentiveness, the dangers of fatigue, and the need for improved procedures when runways are out of service. It also highlighted how even highly experienced pilots can make grave errors under the wrong conditions. The fact that no lives were lost that night was nothing short of a miracle, a result of last-minute decisions, sharp-eyed pilots on the ground, and perhaps sheer luck. It stands today as one of the closest calls in commercial aviation history.